So it looks like things are off to a splendid start for Shedeur Sanders, hooking up with Denzel Boston on touchdowns. Harold Fannin Jr. Shedeur Sanders looks like he is leading the way for this quarterback competition. He led the breakdown for the team and all types of stuff. We got to get into all of it, man. Welcome to Keep the Vision. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, share the channel, hit that bell notification, and hype the video. That'd be greatly appreciated. Let's get right into things. So we got to get right into the footage, man. Shedeur Sanders.
He walked into Brown's camp with everyone waiting for him to fail. Then he stood in front of Todd Monken and said something that changed the entire conversation. Nobody expected this. Not after the year he had. Not after the doubters lined up before he even threw his first NFL pass. But there he was, calm, focused, like a man who already knew something the rest of the world didn't. This is the story of a quarterback who has been underestimated his entire life, and what happened when he finally stopped trying to prove people wrong and started proving himself right. Before we go further, if you're new here, this is where we dig into the real stories behind the players everyone thinks they already understand. Hit subscribe, because this one gets deeper the further you go. Let's rewind. Shedeur Sanders didn't arrive in Cleveland the way a franchise quarterback usually does. No red carpet, no top 10 pick. He watched round after round pass on draft night, watched his name get skipped over and over, while cameras stayed locked on his face the entire time. The whole country was watching him get humbled in real time. 5th round, pick 144, a number that was supposed to define him as a backup, a project, maybe a camp arm at best. Think about that for a second. A player who was once talked about as a potential #1 overall pick, sitting in a green room, watching name after name get called that wasn't his. Cameras zoomed in on his face every single time, waiting for a crack in the armor. It never came. And that composure, weirdly enough, became the first chapter of this story, long before he ever took an NFL snap. But somewhere in that humiliation, something else was building, because when the Browns finally turned to him mid-season, out of necessity more than belief, Sanders didn't look like an afterthought. He looked like a starter. It happened almost by accident. Cleveland had traded away Joe Flacco. Dillon Gabriel, the rookie ahead of him on the depth chart, went down with a concussion. And suddenly, a 5th-round pick nobody had drawn up plans for was handed the keys to an NFL offense with almost no notice. His first start became a headline all by itself. Cleveland hadn't had a quarterback win his very first career start since 1995. 3 decades of history, and Sanders broke it in his debut. For one night, the noise stopped. Even the skeptics had to pause. 7 games, over 200 pass attempts, 7 touchdowns, flashes of poise that made scouts pause, but also 10 interceptions, growing pains, moments where the pressure of an entire fan base and entire legacy seemed to sit right on his shoulders. And that's when the noise started, real noise, not just fans in the comment section. National analysts, former players, people with platforms questioning whether he'd ever be anything more than a name.
Connecting with what many people perceive to be wide receiver 1, Denzel Boston out of Washington. Got the motion there. Boom. Dot. Right on time. Right on time. Looking good, man. Denzel Boston looking really, really good here in camp. And then this was also very interesting. Okay, here it says, breaking news, and this shout out to Life in Football.
There was one game, though, that shut a lot of people up, even if only for a week. A Sunday in December against Tennessee. Sanders threw for over 360 yards, 3 touchdowns, in a performance that looked nothing like a 5th-round rookie just trying to survive. It was statistically the best game of his young career. Cleveland still lost that day, but something about the way he played it stuck with people. For the first time, the conversation wasn't just about whether he belonged, it was about what he might become. One columnist put it bluntly, comparing him not to a franchise quarterback, but to a career backup, a guy who sticks around the league without ever becoming the answer. That comparison spread fast. It stung, because it wasn't cruelty for the sake of cruelty. It was a real question a lot of people were quietly asking. Is Shedeur Sanders actually good enough, or is he just good enough to be talked about? Because let's be honest, no rookie quarterback in recent memory has carried this much attention before proving anything at the professional level. Every mistake got amplified. Every interception became a headline. Every good throw got buried under a wave of skepticism, like the football world refused to give him credit without conditions attached. And it wasn't just strangers on television. It was scouts. It was executives. People inside the league who questioned whether his college production would translate, whether the hype train built around his last name would collapse the moment real NFL pressure hit. Social media didn't make it any easier. Every single week, timelines split in two. One side posting his highlight throws on repeat, calling him the most gifted young quarterback in the league. The other side clipping his worst interceptions, stacking them together, using them as proof he was already a bust. There was almost no middle ground online. You either believed completely or you didn't believe at all. And Sanders had to live inside that split screen every single week of his rookie year, whether he wanted to or not. Because that's the other layer to this story. He's not just Shedeur Sanders, the quarterback. He's the son of Deion Sanders, a Hall of Famer, a cultural icon, a man whose shadow stretches over every single thing his son does on a football field. Every comparison, every parallel, every whisper about nepotism or opportunity, it all lives under that shadow, whether it's fair or not. By the end of that rookie season, Cleveland had finished 5-12. The head coach who gave him his shot, Kevin Stefanski, was fired. Sanders spoke about that relationship with real respect, saying they'd grown to understand each other over the course of a difficult year. But respect for a departing coach doesn't guarantee anything about your own future. A new coaching staff means a clean slate, and a clean slate can go either way. It can be a fresh chance, it can also be a clean exit. So how does a young man handle that kind of pressure without breaking? That question sat at the center of everything, until people close to the organization started speaking up.
It says Cleveland Browns quarterback Shedeur Sanders is in the middle of the huddle breaking it down. Day 1 of year 2. Take a look. So you got him being a leader. You got him making good passes. Now you got him being a leader, breaking down the huddle, showing that he can have that voice for the team. And all of this bodes well for Shedeur. You know what I mean? All of this bodes well. Look, he's off to a hell of
Former Browns defensive back turned analyst Tyvis Powell had been watching closely, and when he stepped in front of a microphone, he didn't hedge. He talked about how Cleveland's roster moves this offseason weren't random, the investment in protecting the quarterback position, the decision not to overhaul the depth chart. According to Powell, all of it pointed toward one conclusion. The organization was quietly building around Sanders, giving him real support instead of throwing him back into chaos. Powell went further, breaking down something specific. He pointed out that Sanders held the ball longer than almost anyone in the league last season, which meant the front office had a clear responsibility. Protect him first. Build the pocket around him before asking him to do anything else. And when you looked at how Cleveland spent its offseason resources, that's exactly the direction they went. That perspective landed differently than the outside noise. This wasn't a fan defending a favorite. This was someone who had been in that locker room, who understood how front offices think, saying the Browns were positioning Sanders not as a temporary answer, but as part of the long-term plan. Still, belief only means so much until the player backs it up on the field, and that's where training camp became the turning point. People close to the program started noticing a difference in him almost immediately. Faster decisions, cleaner footwork, a rhythm that wasn't there during his rookie stretch. Head coach Todd Monken, brought in fresh, with no emotional attachment to what happened last season, spoke about Sanders in a way that felt different from the usual coach speak. He talked about elite playmaking ability, about a player who processes the game quicker now, who gets the ball out before pressure arrives, who eliminates the negative plays that used to define his rookie tape. That's not just praise. That's a coach identifying growth in the exact areas that were supposed to be his biggest weaknesses. And then came the moment that really shifted the room. During one of the sessions, Sanders delivered what people inside camp described as a statement throw, the kind of play that doesn't just move the chains, it changes how a coaching staff looks at a player. Reports from camp described Monken visibly reacting, the kind of reaction that told everyone watching this wasn't just another rep, this was a message. Because here's the thing about pressure, it either breaks you or it sharpens you. And what unfolded across those camp practices looked less like a young quarterback surviving scrutiny and more like one using it as fuel. Teammates picked up on it too. Sanders talked about a reset trip the team took together before camp started, a chance to build chemistry away from cameras and expectations. He described feeling like the group was in a different headspace this year, more locked in, more connected. That kind of team buy-in doesn't happen by accident. It happens when a locker room starts believing in the guy leading them.
But one of the most interesting things happened was I came in with energy and we talked about the EPA conversation and they said why Shedeur wasn't it and the kids was looking like this. They about to go to sleep. So I got up and played perfect timing. They went crazy. These people went crazy. They put the wrist up. They was mobbing. These dudes was going dressed like they kept telling them. They said, listen. And then it got to a question and answer.
But let's not pretend the questions disappeared. This is still an open competition. Deshaun Watson, finally healthy again after years of setbacks, is fighting for the same job. Dillon Gabriel is still developing behind the scenes. Cleveland has cycled through so many quarterbacks over the years that fans have learned to brace themselves before getting attached to anyone. That history is exactly why so many people remained cautious about fully buying into the Sanders story, no matter how good camp looks. There's a brutal comparison that's been following him too, one that cuts deeper than the usual criticism. A respected national writer recently described the gap between Sanders, the public figure, and Sanders, the player, saying that off the field, people see the son of a legend, someone built for the spotlight. But strictly as a quarterback, that same writer placed his ceiling somewhere closer to a solid, long-tenured starter, not a franchise-defining one. Names like that get thrown around a lot in this league. Competent, durable, respected, but never quite the guy a franchise builds its identity around. For a player who has been compared to greatness his entire life, being compared to steady average must sting in a completely different way. And that tension, hope against history, belief against burnout, is what makes this moment so gripping. Because Sanders isn't asking anyone to trust him blindly. He said it himself, almost matter of fact, that every single day he has to prove something, not just to the coaches and the fans, but to himself. That mindset, the refusal to lean on potential and instead demand proof from himself daily, is what separates prospects who fade from players who become something real. It's not loud, it's not flashy, it's just quiet, relentless accountability. Think about what it takes to operate like that under this level of scrutiny. Every practice rep dissected online, every comparison to his father recycled endlessly, every mistake magnified into a referendum on whether he belongs. Most 24-year-olds would crack under a fraction of that weight. Instead, camp reports describe someone who seems more comfortable, more himself than at any point since he arrived in Cleveland. That doesn't mean the story has a guaranteed ending. Monken has been careful, deliberately careful, not to hand this job to anyone. He's talked about naming a starter deep into camp, maybe not until preseason games force his hand. That uncertainty is brutal for a fan base desperate for stability, but it's also fair. This is a competition that has to be earned on tape, not given away out of sentiment or storyline.
For this younger generation, they have had the opportunity to experience Shedeur Sanders on so many different levels, at least for the last 10 years, right? Whether it was him as a kid being on reality TV or just watching him through the ranks, in college and now in the NFL. And when you get a young man like that, whose spirit is right, whose heart is right, energy don't lie. And that vibrant energy, it just...
Picture what training camp actually looks like from the inside right now. 3 quarterbacks splitting reps almost evenly, each one knowing that every single throw is being charted, graded, and compared. Watson, a former #1 overall pick, trying to rebuild trust after years lost to injury and controversy. Gabriel, a young talent still trying to find his footing, and Sanders, the one who already tasted the starting job once and refuses to let it slip away quietly. That's not a relaxed summer camp. That's a pressure cooker. Every single day, with reporters counting reps and fans debating every rotation on social media within minutes. Still, something has clearly shifted. The tone around Sanders this camp feels different from the panic that surrounded him during his rookie interceptions. Coaches are speaking about his growth in specific, technical terms, not just vague encouragement. Teammates are rallying around him. And the people who know the business side of the organization, people like Powell, are pointing to real roster decisions as evidence that Cleveland sees him as part of their future, not just a placeholder. Maybe that's the real story here, not a young quarterback who's already arrived, but one who's fighting, day by day, rep by rep, to rewrite a narrative that was written about him before he ever got the chance to write it himself. Because that's what makes this different from just another camp battle. This isn't only about who starts week 1. It's about whether a kid who was picked apart on national television during the draft, who inherited a legacy heavier than most players will ever carry, can walk into a building full of skeptics and slowly, throw by throw, turn them into believers. And there's something almost poetic about where this is happening. Cleveland, a franchise that hasn't lifted a championship since before the current version of the team even existed, a fan base so used to disappointment at the quarterback position that hope itself feels risky.
If Sanders is the answer, he's not just changing his own story, he's changing the story of an entire city that has been waiting decades for somebody to finally stick. Look ahead a few months, past the preseason, past the roster cuts, into the regular season itself. If Sanders wins this job, the pressure doesn't disappear, it just changes shape. A backup competing for reps gets the benefit of low expectations. A starter doesn't get that luxury. Every third down conversion, every red zone decision, every fourth quarter possession with the game on the line becomes a referendum, live, in real time, in front of a fan base that has waited years for stability at the position. That's the next test, and it's a completely different kind of pressure than anything camp can simulate. There's also the business side of this story that rarely gets talked about on the field. Sanders has built a massive personal brand away from football, a following that extends well beyond Sundays. That visibility cuts both ways. It gives him a platform most rookies never get. It also means every stumble gets amplified tenfold, replayed across every timeline, dissected by people who've never coached a football game in their life. Balancing that spotlight with the day-to-day grind of an NFL quarterback room is its own quiet battle, one that happens far away from the cameras rolling during practice. And yet, ask anyone who has spent real time around this roster this summer, and the answer keeps circling back to the same word: different. Different energy, different confidence, different level of trust between Sanders and the coaching staff compared to a year ago when everything felt improvised and reactive. Nobody is promising a championship, nobody is even promising a winning record, but there's a version of this season that looks nothing like the chaos of the last one, and that alone feels like progress worth paying attention to. Nobody knows yet how this season ends. Maybe Watson reclaims the job, maybe Gabriel surprises everyone, or maybe Sanders keeps building on what he started this offseason and finally silences the noise that's followed him since draft night. But right now, in the middle of an Ohio summer, under the weight of every expectation imaginable, Shedeur Sanders looks like a man who stopped worrying about what people think he is and started becoming exactly who he set out to be. He's not chasing his father's shadow anymore. He's stepping fully into his own light, one rep, one throw, one hard-earned yard at a time. And, whether the critics are ready to admit it or not, the version of him showing up in Berea this summer looks nothing like the player they wrote off a year ago. And whatever happens next, one thing is already clear: this story is far from finished.